Hey, thank you for joining us for this Global Resilience Commission forum on our water infrastructure resilience effort. We just concluded an outstanding webinar with a great set of panelists that have agreed to join us. We're going to have a lively hour pack here with additional questions, bring in some additional information, and basically paint some new pictures for you guys. It's my pleasure, though, to introduce Mr. John Organic, who is going to lead our facilitation effort, and John will be handing it back and forth to me. But keep in mind that this is all about issues, answers, and questions. If you want to submit a question, please use the toolbar. We collected a bunch of them from the initial session, but we will continue to mine that resource. But we're going to look in the questions pane, not the chat pane. And just be part of our team. Join us, sign up for future GRCom sessions. And then I'm going to present some opportunities in this session for you to become part of our work group partners. So with that, it's my pleasure to turn this over to Mr. John Organic, who's going to do kind of deal the cards with our questions. So John, I'll turn it over. One quick thing. Our partners here for Omni Threat Structures, which we'll get a chance to brief later, and Blackstar Tech. And now, John, it's the first discussion period. It's all yours.
Okay, I'd like to start. Nick and Robert are going to be leaving about 1 o'clock. So we want to be able to pick up some of the questions. A very specific question, but it has potentially great impact, not on the global water perhaps, but on being able to assess these things properly. And that has to do with the URI, the Utility Resilience Index, Nick, that you brought up. And the question was, did you develop this from a national perspective or from each one of the water systems in the footprint?
So we assess, so through WIA and, per the J100 standard, we assess all of our water systems individually. So when we conduct our risk assessments and our planning, it's done at a public water system or PWSID level. What we then do is we take that information and we aggregate it so that we can understand both the local URI, but also we want to drive consistency across all of the systems that we operate in those 16 states. So we do assess it locally, but we look at that data, really at an enterprise level as well, because we want to make sure that we're supporting, all of the systems that we operate.
And I think I should have at least introduced the people being inside the group and listening to all this all the time, and you become familiar. But with the J100 itself, which is an assessment tool that helps you with the resilience, okay? And it's published, or it's a tool that's been co-developed with AWWA and the ASME, and it does come up with an indicator on this. Robert, I would like to ask on that indicator, because we have a source of funding called BRIC, okay, which people are beginning to become familiar with about resilience. Do you see a utility resilience index like this being some basis for BRIC funding in terms of, instead of a benefit to cost analysis, perhaps you're talking about a URI cost analysis in this?
Well, it is. There are requirements in a lot of different states on funding, loan funding and grant funding on utilities dealing with assets and resiliency and how they're maintaining their assets and they're recording their assets. So there already is in a lot of states that requirement. And as a result of this pandemic and some of the issues in Texas and some of the cybersecurity issues, I see some of those requirements growing, the need for utilities to be more attentive, if you will, to things that make them resilient. I do, not only BRIC funding, but other sources of funding. And quite often the funding may come from the feds, but it's usually filtered out through the state agencies.
Nick, do you have anything to add on that perspective?
Yeah, I think, I think use of the standard is important. And I think when you look at the J100 standard, it has evolved over the years. It is a national standard, And, to the extent that, the utilities are utilizing that national standard to ultimately get to those, improvement plans that they need to, they're able to look back and there's a consistent way that they came up with that, that solution set. So I think, as we look at, ultimately, requesting funding through those programs, I think it's important to have that look back to say, well, how did you ultimately get to that conclusion? And continued use of, that standard, I think, is very important.
And what are some of the components that are analyzed in that assessment?
So from a J100 perspective, it's really, first, it takes an all hazards based approach. It then looks at your existing controls that you may have in place. It looks at different either threat asset pairs, or it looks at your worst reasonable case approach. And what you do is you put that into the risk assessment, and what you end up with is a list of opportunities and mitigations to address those different risks that you put into the tool. And from that point, you do the traditional risk management process. You look at the cost benefit analysis, you look at those different, which improvements will give you the most benefit, most risk reduction, as well as increasing resilience. So either you're going to look to put improvements in place that reduce risk, or you're going to put in place improvements that increase your resiliency. At American Water, from a resiliency perspective, we've utilized the URI to help measure and quantify that resiliency going forward, which is in the standard.
Yeah, and John, I'll just comment too on the J100. The AWEA risk and resiliency assessment doesn't prescribe a necessary methodology to do that assessment. The J100 is a great tool developed by AWWA, and it also meets the Safety Act standard, which means that it possibly could help you in a lawsuit, help meet to show that you have met a national standard, and it meets or exceeds the Safety Act standard. So that's a benefit. Also, it looks really, really hard at your assets, and is there a single point of failure? And what can you do to mitigate that single point of failure? Can you keep going without that asset? Can you continue to function without that asset? Can you marginally function, or at what level can you function? And it looks at your major assets. So your employees are going to contribute greatly to which assets are the most important to you and how well you can function with the asset not present or not functioning.
Yeah, and I think just to add to that, John, what I think, when I talk to my teams, what they get the most value out of is, you understand sort of that the risk matrix, right? Consequences, vulnerability, threat likelihood. By walking through the process of the J100, you really gain an understanding of truly what your consequences are, what your vulnerabilities are, and the different threats and the likelihood of those threats. So it's a great tool, and for us, serving multiple communities and multiple water systems, it's a consistent way that we can apply a risk assessment methodology. I think that's a real value to the sector.
Just a little bit differently, how would you incorporate business continuity? Because in this discussion around risk and to that extent, resilience. Nick?
I can go. Yeah, so we also have business continuity plans. So when we look at business continuity, we look at that continued operation of our business. A lot of the risk assessments drive you into your emergency response plans, right? So depending on how you look at business continuity, emergency response is really the first step. So we looked at the risk, we update the emergency response plan so we understand how to respond to the emergency. And then business continuity is how do you ultimately, what are those critical processes that need to continue? How do you resume operations? Which then takes you into resiliency. So BCP is absolutely a part of the overall structure of managing risk at the utility. And it typically just looks at a slightly different part of the risk matrix.
Yeah, John, that's really a great question. And a lot of people get business continuity plans and emergency response plans. They get them a little bit mixed up. emergency response plan really is just for a few days. You know, that's a few days, 2 or 3, 4 days to stand back up. And a business continuity plan is weeks. It could be weeks or months. You know, how do you function and keep in mind the long term, not just a few days. So usually an ERP is say 3 days to say a week, and then a business continuity plan can be weeks or months.
John, I'll
Maya,
share one
go ahead.
of the most recent business continuity plans we've been dealing with over the last 12 months, which is, you know, response to a pandemic and our pandemic planning. You know, when you think about how do you continue to deliver service, how do you continue your business and your operations in the face of you know, workforce, you know, loss of workforce or supply chain disruptions. Those are some of the things that are considered in the business continuity plan. And you look, you know, the pandemic has taken the last 12 months, which is not something that the emergency response plan would have necessarily addressed.
And also the utility resilience index, you know, measures things like employees are in that measurement. You know, how long can you keep going? A generator, if you had to run on a generator, can you run 24 hours, 48 hours, 96 hours? The higher and longer you can run, the better score you'll get in the utility resilience index.
Can you speak, Maya, now that you've heard, we're talking in a lot of details in terms of the utilities, et cetera, but what are your perceptions in terms of, let's say, Israel and the water sector there? Maybe perhaps you don't get into the details on the operation, but what are your perspectives on that?
First of all, we have a lot of cyber attack attempts on our desalination facilities as well. So if Robert and Nick are in touch with people in the Israeli field, maybe it's a good thing to try and touch base and to learn from each other and to see if there's any growing experience already that we could be able to share. No doubt this is a very dangerous challenge for us. As I said in my talk before, 80% of Israel's water is desalinated. We have we're totally dependent on desalination, up to a very dangerous position. For us, it's even more dangerous because we have unprotected and unmanaged properly offshore drilling for gas and oil in our Mediterranean Sea. And if there's a leak of gas and of oil, then basically we would not be able to use the facilities, which is crazy. And it's the same ministry actually which is in charge of the desalination plants on the one hand, and on overlooking the way that the offshore drilling is being managed, and they just don't understand the connection between the two. Is kind of frustrating. And also, there are more concerns to be taken into consideration. For instance, just recently, not recently, a couple of years ago, there was a situation here in which 2 of the desalination plants were actually exposed for tampering with the levels of the water that they produced, in order to make more profit out of it. And this was also poorly managed, I'm afraid, here by the Ministry of Energy and Water. And so nobody was really punished, and they don't really understand the magnitude of importance of sticking to the water, you know, the parameters of the water and the amount of saltiness that it has, and the effect of saltiness water that because we use the water again, we recycle the water also to, after we use it ourselves, then use the wastewater facilities in order to water our grounds here, our fields. And having saltier water, you know, watering our fields damages the soil. So, and it's not bad people, it's just people who don't understand. And I think that the biggest problem is ignorance. They don't understand exactly what they're doing. Those who do understand and you know, disregard it for the profit are a problem, but they need to be better managed by the policymakers. And one of the things that we're trying to do is bridge the gaps of ignorance.
Thank you. John, over to you.
Hey, thanks, John. Let me move it forward here and offer one of our partners a chance to talk a little bit about their capabilities. It's interesting we talk about attacks on critical infrastructure. That's right up Omni Threat Structures wheelhouse. It's my pleasure to introduce Brian Octon. Brian is going to give us a few moments to tell a little bit about what Omni Threat does. Brian?
Thank you, John. First off, a great discussion. Glad to be here. All this stuff is very critical. Here at Omni, we call a lot of this stuff all mission critical kind of operations, and that's what we're focused on. You see there's a couple of company names here, Omni Threat and CPS. Omni Threat was recently acquired by Matt and Brandon and brought into the portfolio, but all of the companies under CPS all work towards securing and hardening mission critical facilities. Slide. So I work with Omni. I actually became aware of Omni as a general contractor years ago, building a critical infrastructure, EMP shielded critical infrastructure for a major power utility. But quickly, we offer EMP protected modules as well as buildings. We have a conductive concrete solution, so we are able to encapsulate mission critical facilities in an EMP shield that is also corrosion resistant and has very high ballistic performances. So there's a number of reasons why EIS and GRCom sponsoring them was beneficial, and there was tons of synergies here, right? Next slide. The basis of Omni's system is a conductive concrete, electromagnetic shielded concrete with embedded shielding grids that a lot of people like to call Faraday cages. But you can kind of see a breakaway of our solution and see how this is a little more resilient than your traditional 6-sided steel box. And this also, for a lot of people that are shocked at some of our UL10 ballistic performance, you can kind of see why this is a little better than your average concrete structure with the integration of not only the rebar, but the shielding grid in the concrete. Slide. This is the large project that introduced me to Omni Threat that I completed, but we were a lot quicker than any other solution that I went and priced out and bid out as a general contractor. The whole facility was 76,000 square feet that we built. 20,000 square feet of it was mil-spec 188, 125 shielded. Took us 180 days to have the dried-in structure, and a cost of $24 million for the core and shell of the whole building plus shielding system. Slide. And this is a little bit of a breakdown on our modules, which we're seeing being very useful for a number of different parties. Ever since the first time we presented, we've had some interesting inquiries, but these are some modules that we have developed. They're mil-spec 188, 125 compliant. There's a number of different ways and configurations that we can make these. These particular modules are being used for testing with the Air Force right now, but this is an example of some of the modules. We are designing currently some much larger modules, but for not only storage of critical spares, but also for housing critical infrastructure that needs ballistic or EMP shielding. These are a great solution and can be dropped on site quickly. Slide.
Hey, Brian, that was outstanding. We really appreciate the partnership. Did you have a final comment?
Yeah, I'm really enthused with some of the people that have reached out, and again, you know, we can only do R&D on problems that we know exist. So hearing some of you guys talk about resiliency and redundancy, I'd love for you guys to reach out to me and And if nothing else, just to spitball questions, we can develop our product a number of different ways, and I simply need to know the problem exists, and then I can help try to come up with solutions. Sometimes that may be us, sometimes it may be other people, but we are passionate about critical infrastructure and would love to help anyone.
And you guys are great partners. We appreciate you being here today and the outreach. We've got other sessions coming up where I think Omni Threat will be highlighted as well. But let's swing back now, John. Let's go into session 2 with some additional questions, and obviously critical infrastructure is up on top of the table. But let's do the next section, John.
Yeah, by the way, with regard to water, I will say that the water sector is increasingly looking into EMP protection too. I'm not sure it's going to be in our current risk and resilience plans, in the update, but I expect it at a certain point that this will be included. I'd like to look at it a little bit from now the regulatory point of view, and I don't necessarily, I'm talking in terms of the security of it, not so much in terms of the water quality or sanitation, although that is going to be important as well. On the regulatory point of view, from the AWIA, the American Waterways Infrastructure Act, you briefly mentioned it, Nick. Do you have any further comments on that? And I'm looking as to, first of all, the coverage, okay, to explain the coverage, and also perhaps in the future, what types of things would you like to see included in an update?
When you say coverage, John, you're thinking about the utilities that are covered?
That's correct. It's just the scope that's covered in the water sector. That being just the water side, right? I mean, this is probably one of the most egregious parts of the coverage right now, the act.
Right. So the current AWIA covers utilities that are serving greater than 3,300 people, and obviously that's there's a significant amount of those. Robert talked about sort of the phased implementation of those utilities. So really, they're in the assessment process right now. And as we really wrap up that assessment process, it's hard to really say what else should be included because we really don't know what what's come out of those assessments for the utilities and where the greatest needs are. So I think it's a little bit of we're waiting to see what the real needs of the sector are. Continuing to educate the sector, but it's hard to sort of make a decision on the next steps for AWIA from my perspective without really getting feedback on how the initial assessment process has gone. I don't know if Robert, if you wanted to provide your perspective.
Thank you, Nick. So the J100 does a really good job of assessing about anything you can imagine. I mean, pandemic is on the list. I remember seeing pandemic for many years. I don't think anybody took it seriously. And, nobody could imagine a worldwide pandemic shutting everything down and to the point of even could affect utilities doing their mission, doing their job, supplying water, not having enough employees to do that. I don't think anybody thought about that, but the J100 covers that. It covers inside threats. It covers outside terrorists and actors. And again, all hazard, as Nick's pointed out, from hurricanes to tornadoes, ice storms, snowstorms, dust storms, anything you can imagine that's topical to your area. It does a pretty good job of what effect would that have on your utility or your assets. And you look at each end of, like Nick was talking about, threat asset pairs. You actually look at the asset and say, okay, if this happened to this asset, can you function? Would you function? Could you complete your mission? And most utilities' mission is providing a certain amount of gallons of water per day for their population that they serve at a certain pressure. Can you function if you had an ice storm and no power? And how long could you function? And so I think the J100, again, that's why it's such a great tool to accomplish your risk and resiliency assessment. Even though EPA doesn't prescribe a method, it is a great tool to work through that process.
So you're putting the two together. That's good. One of the other factors, though, in reading the AWEA, that it's not just the critical infrastructure, right? It's such things as funding, it's the supply chain, it's
Yep.
the personnel, it's other actions. Perhaps you can mention, or you have some thoughts or comments on that?
Well, again, if you had an asset that was your chemical storage and you frankly don't have enough chemical storage for, like Nick talked about, that there was some supply chain issues in Texas. If you don't have enough chemical storage, then that definitely would be a vulnerability, and that would be on your target out of your assessment to work on, to fix, to how can we improve that? So maybe you only have a few days or a week, and you really, to be independent, you might need a month to meet the responsibilities of your business continuity plan and your ERP. You may need to extend that. So chemical storage would be one. Pump station. You only have one pump station and it goes out, then how can you function? Can you buy water from another utility? Again, what other means can you put forth to complete your mission, providing water to the population that you serve usually at about a 30 PSI minimum?
Yeah, and I think, when you think about worst reasonable case, that's, when I think about the pandemic, if you did your risk assessment before, the pandemic, you may need to adjust what worst reasonable case meant. Could you have envisioned what the last 12 months would have brought us? So I think, and that's the reason why you redo these assessments, right? Is that you take those lessons learned and, something on the Black Sky side that we used to call lessons imagined, and what is that worst reasonable case? And I think even on cyber, we have standardized cyber controls, but when you start to look at all hazards, you look at the level of sophistication on the cyber side now that we're seeing, cyber engineering really starts to factor into that. Can you eliminate vulnerabilities rather than mitigate them? So those types of concepts, I think when you look at all hazards, when you take an all hazards based approach, those types of concepts start to filter in because you start to look at your utility holistically and address, to Robert's point, how can you, sustain that operation? How can you continue to deliver, water or wastewater services, to the communities that you serve?
John,
Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, you make a good point though about money. So this assessment, this risk and resiliency assessment, is not just for the employees. It really is for the board. Where should they be allowing money to be spent? Where should they be allocating the budget? And where can they fix and repair or extend services and make you score better in your scoring, in your risk and resiliency assessment, and also your utility assessment. So the money part is huge, and usually after this assessment, they evaluate money with it. Money's tied to it, and so where can they allocate? Where's the best bang for your buck? Where's the low hanging fruit? The least cost, and then get down to, okay, it's going to be 5 years before we can afford that. But go ahead and spend the money and get that low hanging fruit out there and accomplish, so that you can better accomplish your mission.
Yeah, I want to mention one thing. I was going back to the supply chain, but joining up the supply chain in the pandemic, one of the things we found with the pandemic was it was affecting the supply chain, at least for carbon dioxide, pretty early on. Mm-hmm. So even doing an emergency response plans, like Nick says, you really have to really imagine the unimaginable, so to speak, in doing these plans. You're never going to get all of it, but at least you give it a try to go beyond, to do what we call bold thinking, to go really beyond what the normal thinking is, because we're going to have these fat tail events where these occurrences are going to be very, very low probability, but they happen. So.
Well, and Ari mentioned that early on in his talk to us about, the interdependencies. So, okay, so your chemical company's got the chemicals, but there's no fuel, so they can't bring it to you. So there's, and the roadway, if there's an ice storm or snowstorms or tornadoes or hurricanes. So there's all kinds of interdependencies that really we gotta think through, and how long can you last, again, without chemicals, without employees, without those assets.
It might be a little unfair, okay, Maya, but could you just give a brief overview of how the water situation operates as a national system in Israel, in your comments on
Well, we have a Ministry of Energy and Water, and we have a water authority, which is separate of it because it's supposed to be, you know, resilient to politics, and ministries come with politicians here in Israel. So the water authority has the authority to decide how to manage the entire water market. And basically, our main sources of water are first of all, desalination, as I said. Second is the Sea of Galilee, which until a few years ago, we still used it as the main source of sweet water. It was a lake of, it's a lake of sweet water. It's the only big water reservoir that we have. And we have rain, the few days of rain that we have, relatively speaking, which we aim to catch as much as possible and to make it, you know, and to catch it into reservoirs and then to bring it onto the groundwater, down into groundwater. And but these are things that are not being dealt with these days. During the past 5 years or even 10, I would say the Water Authority is putting the majority of its efforts into desalination, and our groundwater is not being treated properly. We have massive amounts of water that are being lost. And this is a crazy thing to think of, even, you know, when you think of where we are located on the map in the international arena, and every drop should be considered as in weight as in gold. So we have a lot of discharges of sewage and of other types of runoff go into to rivers with authority by the water authority, and that's basically it.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that unlike in the, let's say in the United States by comparison, where you have 150,000 water systems, okay, not all of them, there's only about 10,000 that really qualify for the AWIA threshold, but these are generally managed individually, except, let's say, with American Water that has a parcel of them. But in Israel, it's managed holistically.
So water is considered a national resource. You're not allowed to catch water by yourself. You're not allowed to manage anything without approval by the government. And you have a central management of water for everyone. And so it's very different than the American system. I think it's actually a better system here, because if you see, for instance, the situation in California, in which you have some very strong farmers who manage to gain access to the majority of water, and then you have many farmers who do not have access to water. This would never happen here, because everything is managed in a central scheme, and there's a overlooking of everything. We have 6 desalination plants, and we're building more, and that's the majority of. And then we provide the water to whoever needs it. They provide the water.
Any more comments, Nick or Robert? Maybe in response to that, I know you've looked at this as more there. It's a national organization. Okay, it's a governmental organization, and you're looking at it from more the coordination point of view through the WSCC and the work with the WG or the GSCC too. Is there, do you feel you're making progress in this, or what?
Well, I think, you know, no doubt a single entity would with the same mission countrywide. I could see like Maya pointed out, like farmers, and you know, they typically get the first bucket, if you will, and I could see where that would greatly help manage water across the nation. And of course, there's wet areas of the United States, and then there's some extremely arid and dry areas of the United States. So no doubt a single entity would help manage that, no doubt.
Nick, do you have some comment?
Yeah, I think it's obviously it's a different different structure than we have here, and I think we just, again, as I mentioned earlier, it's sort of an all the above strategy, right? I don't think there's a single answer here. I think we need to continue to really look at all the solutions that are available, and the public-private partnership, in my opinion, is the really the most critical aspect here. Being able to collaborate with the GCC and the WSCC. Being able to sort of have representation from, even though there's 50,000 plus water systems, and you get into the smaller ones, it takes you over 100,000. We think through the associations we are really able to get a good cross section and good representation of the utilities and come up with real solutions.
If I may, there's one thing that I learned while I was preparing for this session, that people throughout the United States, many places, they pay different prices for water. And this is something also that would never happen here in Israel. You have the different sectors, you have the industry sector and the farmers and vice sector, but you would never have a person who cannot afford to pay for water here. That's something that's incomprehensible even to think of. And I understand that many people in the United States do not have access to clean water or do not have access to affordable water.
Yeah, and some of that's being looked at too, Maya, as far as affordability. There's lots of interest in Congress about affordability and what to do about it. Really is. But even though one entity would be great, it would be very difficult just because of the sheer size of the United States and across it. And of course, water quality makes the difference in price too from one utility. Some utilities don't hardly do any treatment at all, and some do extensive treatments, and it takes facilities to do that, and of course monies and piping and et cetera makes up the difference in the rates.
Yeah, difference in source. And one more, I'm going to let you repeat it, Nick, from the first session about the ESF, because I think that's an important point in this discussion. From a national level, may pertain only to the US, but I think the lesson pertains across the world.
Yeah, the real key there is, and the reason I brought it up is, when we have a black sky hazard, when we have a large national disaster, something like we saw, in Texas, for example, we with all of the different water utilities within that geographic area, we need to be able to, manage the emergency response through a single source. And today, and what we've seen in the past, is there's different ESFs. Sometimes it's ESF 3, which is public works. Sometimes it's fire. And what we said, what the Sector Coordinating Council put forward was, let's consolidate the water sector mission into a single ESF underneath, it'd still be the EPA as the lead agency. And we also proposed creating a separate ESF for water, a new ESF, to really elevate the water mission and both consolidate the response and get critical lifeline sector status in that ESF structure. We're still working through that with our federal partners. Currently, they've started to consolidate under ESF 3, but we're continuing to evaluate that and work with them on the right solution.
So there's a lot of, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I'll comment that ESF is an emergency support function for those that these acronyms sometimes get you tongue twisted, but emergency support function.
And it's a way of kind of consolidating, integrating, rationalizing, et cetera, especially during an emergency. So we do all the planning, and then when the emergency comes, everybody scatters into 3 ESFs, or the direction scatters into 3 ESFs. So,
well, and everybody would,
water.
Everybody in a water ESF would only have one mission, where some of the other ESFs that Nick commented on have multiple missions. And because water is tied in with some of them, water can be number 5 or number 10 on the list. So sometimes we get lost. But how does a community stand back up when they don't have drinking water or wastewater services or fire protection?
So you see, by 2 different models, the Israel model of coherence and unification, et cetera, and the US dealing with a numerous 150,000, water systems, each one being responsible to provide clean water. and there's a big difference and big challenge. And the Water Sector Coordinating Council is one of those organs that an agency or activity that helps to do that consolidation.
Yeah,
Okay,
and
Remember
John,
that it's the size of New Jersey, so it's not, so it's
I
a
didn't
lot
want to
easier
mention that.
maybe to manage the market here.
Robert,
that's right.
Robert mentioned scale, so I didn't want
Yeah.
to mention that.
Yeah.
John?
Go ahead.
Yeah, let's jump ahead before we jump into the third session. It's such great discussion between all you all. Really hate to interrupt it. I want to share a little information with everybody on the call. We're going to do this quick so we can jump right back. EarthX, EIS Council's kind of signature event this year again will be available for play from 1 September through 31 October. I thought it was very interesting that Robert brought up the level of interdependencies, which is something that EarthX highlights, and then cascading consequences, which I think we have kind of championed that issue in all 4 of the previous years. This will be our 5th year. We did have over 40 countries play last year. Thousands played, and even thousands came back and played it a second time because it is very dynamic. This year's exercise is actually going to have water embedded in part of it. There are 2 threats ripped directly from the headlines. It is climate change driven, just exactly what we've been talking about. We do have some overarching learning and resilience objectives that I think everybody on this call and on this webinar would be interested in learning more about. And we've constructed EarthX this year to be perfect for both individual and team play. I'm very excited to talk to everybody about the opportunity to sign up and become part of one of our work groups. You'll notice we've got 7 of them up here. We focus on communities, individuals, and families, but also critical infrastructure in the utilities, public safety and emergency management, all that talk about ESFs. Definitely, I would love to see a water ESF. I think it's a critical component that is missing and needs to be highlighted. But health and medical coming out of the pandemic couldn't be more important. And then we're also building in 2 specialty lanes, one for public utility commissioners. Imagine that, the people that regulate our water and electricity, getting a lane for themselves. And then I'm exceptionally happy to note that we're going to do a lane for scouting around the world this year so that our scouts, both Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts, have the ability to get in and begin to learn about emergency management and some of these community threats. Our initial planning meeting, I mentioned this on the previous call, again, Friday, April 16th, 2 p.m. If you signed up for this webinar, you'll get this link in an email as well. But we do hope you'll join us because at that webinar, we're going to show you how to become one of our work group members. So with that being said, John, that's record time for me. I want to bring it back for you to go into session 3, and then we do have some closeout information at the end. So John, bring it back to you.
Okay, I know Robert and Nick have got to go to attend the meeting very shortly. I want to raise one question, and I'm going to bring it back to Maya. This idea of equity, we talk about equity not only within a system's footprint, but the other comment on equity I really would like to address is this notion of what we call a stranded infrastructure, where the population's going down, there's difficulty in funding in order to upkeep that infrastructure. I do know, Robert, do you have some comment on that? And then I'll ask Nick the same thing. In those communities where they find that the population decrease, but you still have to maintain a ongoing infrastructure, and what is an appropriate consideration or appropriate response for that?
And I'm going to tell you, some communities, particularly when you've had very, very large manufacturing to leave, and you have large water lines, large tanks, large plants, that's very, very difficult to manage a utility like that. And I mean, it would take some pretty serious engineering to see, water quality is the issue, and trying to maintain, again, water quality with large mains, large tanks, and large water plants. When you have, a manufacturing facility or facilities that have moved out, maybe they were using 75 or 80% of your water, or a contributor of 80% of your wastewater. So not only the facilities, but also the income, just to see what the income, losing that income would be traumatic for a utility.
So I think Nick had to leave. just briefly explain, because from the engineer perspective, having large pipes, how does that affect the water quality?
Okay, it's called residency time. The amount of time that a water is in a pipe, it degrades. The longer that water is in a pipe or in a tank, the water quality degrades, and you get into usually disinfection byproducts, trihalomethanes, haloacidic acids, things like that, and that's been a real challenge for utilities, even utilities that aren't oversized in water mains and water tanks. That's still a challenge because of the small amount of contaminant that it takes. I'm talking 80 parts per billion in trihalomethanes. So that's the struggle, is the water quality degrades the longer it stays in the line. Larger the main, larger the tank, then the longer it stays in the line or the tank before it's used.
Yeah, we found that during the pandemic, right? With the buildings that were unused. What happened?
Exactly. Yep, large buildings that basically nobody was in, and the plumbing water stayed in there for weeks or months, and you get bacterial growth or could get biological bacterial growth within the systems. And there was all kinds of reports and guidance put out on flushing and maintaining those systems. But yeah, it's a great example.
Yeah, and we're lucky. And a couple of the questions that did come in, and this now shifts over to, I'm sure what Maya would address. And we're talking about the United States, okay? So we have a series of laws. We have these tools like J100. We go into flushing, we can use some of this water. We can consider it a value, the thing that we have. But in many countries, they don't have these. So have you, Maya, looked at countries where, other than Israel, where they're contending with issues with water, and what are your observations about that?
Well, as I said before, Israel is actually one of the leaders in the world in initiatives and solutions and finding ways to save water and to use as little water as possible in toilets and in watering systems for agriculture. And we have collaborations. I think Singapore is a good example also for a country who knows to manage these things very well. And also now that we have a new peace relationship with our new allies in the United Emirates, one of the things that we are really trying to put an emphasis on there, because they're such a desert area and they have a lot of, I think all of their water is desalinated. We're trying to put a lot of emphasis now in creating bigger collaborations and to work together to promote the solutions for tomorrow, instead of keep on investing into oil and to fossil fuels and to gas, which Israel and the United Emirates are doing right now, which is, the issues of the past. In order to look to the future and to understand that the majority of our area is going to be in desert, and many areas around the world are going to face the problem of clean water, this needs to be the number one, I think, challenge everybody takes on themselves. We can make so much money also from inventing the better solutions of portable desalination and portable cleaning of water, in order to be able to deal with such contamination, such bacteria, instead of flushing it out. There are already solutions, I'm sure, that could have solved this in a way that doesn't flush down the water also.
Okay,
I'm sorry, John. I need to excuse myself. I've got a meeting at 1 o'clock, so I need to excuse myself. Thank you very much. Enjoyed it greatly.
Robert.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
And Maya, one of the, as a result of bringing together people for this webinar, I know one of the countries in Africa reached out to us. It was the country of Ghana, and spoke about how would you go about constructing a large-scale plan, not only for water, but some of the other infrastructures and how they would be affected by climate, not only climate change, but the effects of climate change as well. You know, the ones that would like floods and stuff like that.
Well, one of the things that we learned this year, I think more than ever, is that we're all in the same boat, and that COVID did not know boundaries, and we all sat at home, and some of us are still sitting in various places in the world. And also climate change has no boundaries, and pollution has no boundaries. And so many people are dying of diseases that can be spared from us, and the misery that can be spared. And this needs to be by collaborations. The main thing is that if we share knowledge, if we share information, if countries and nationalities and governments work better together, and this is also a good opportunity to put, you know, to put front the joint things that we have instead of the clashes and the problems. I think that we have the UN and we have the World Bank, and they're already very big institutes, and the European Union, which does a lot of work together. They have many programs already for such collaborations, and even a very simple Google search would find places to network and to share information and to share data and to share fundraising, which is a very important thing. At the end of the day, the biggest problem is money. We need to make money available. We need to pressure the governments in order to invest as much as possible into these infrastructures, and to maybe even create new types of financing models in order to be, you know, more feasibly financially. This is all a lot of opportunities. It's all inventing ourselves from the beginning. You can look at it as also as an optimistic thing if we work on it fast enough, and if we catch it as early as possible, because scientists give us 10 years to close the window of opportunity in order to stop climate change, the climate crisis, and still be able to pass and go on to the future, which would be an optimistic and healthy future for us all.
But yeah, in the meantime, though, the countries have to deal with many of the consequences. I mean, we see that here in the United States, and we're a lot more wealthy in that regard to be able to contend with that. But I'm talking perhaps like in Africa or in some of the Mediterranean communities that you were talking about.
So I know, for instance, that in the Ivory Coast, they're putting together, they have a new plan for catching runoff water, and they're investing trillions of dollars into new projects. And there is money available out there. There is money that is looking for good investments. They just need to understand that the water is the good investment, and not by, you know, taking too high costs for people, to not making people need to pay too much for this. One of our biggest concerns is it's like science fiction, like we saw now with COVID, that suddenly you had, you know, the animals roaming out in the fields and in the streets of the cities. The same goes for the water barons. One of the things that we're very concerned about is that you have all these desalination plants and these water facilities that work for this for money only, and don't understand the importance of the mission that they have and the responsibility that they hold. And we want to be able to secure safe water for everybody also in the future, even in 10 and 20 and 50 years from now. We need to be able to look into the long future and to make sure that we have water for everybody, just as the SDG number 6 says.
Yeah, and I appreciate too that you raised the issue of Egypt and Ethiopia and how, and in India and Pakistan, how this could actually generate, you know, spark wars among countries. We had so-called wars in places in the United States, but this would be national wars. If you look at India and Pakistan, you start to see two nuclear powers fighting over water, and you can extend or logically conclude what the end result just might be if that the friction became too great.
Right, you know how it starts, but you don't know how it will end, and that is a big problem. And as I said, it creates frictions and it creates conflicts, but it can also create collaborations and it could create peace. And it's just a matter of putting your mind to it, and to have governments put their mind to it. And governments need, they need to be guided into this sometimes by these international organizations like the UN, like the World Bank, like other organizations. But also these organizations need to be really focused on the good of the people. And, it's horrible that wherever you look, when you look with a magnifying glass, you see problems of how things are being managed. And maybe it's nature of mankind to still prefer, making a profit over benefiting the good, and you can always find corruption everywhere. But I do believe that the good of the people is the most important thing. And we are we're in an unprecedented time. And even people who usually put profit in front of other things need to understand that this is not a regular time, and this is a time of crisis. And if we don't act very fast, we're all not going to keep on being here.
Yeah,
Not us, and
yeah.
definitely not us, our children and our grandchildren.
Yeah, one of the things that I think not many people know, but Israel for many years was actually helping its real enemies in terms of providing them water and providing
We
them
still do.
the opportunity. And
Okay.
that's just a little known fact. So somewhere there's that little bit of thing that
That's
brings the
how I said
countries
before.
together.
I mentioned it before when we spoke about the migration of
People.
refugees, and it's something that also concerns a lot in the United States when you have people coming from Latin America and they just want to find a safe place to live. And we need to be able to help them live their lives at home and stay at home and not hit the road. Nobody wants to be a refugee. It's a very difficult life. And they come from difficult circumstances to begin with. And they put themselves in extreme measures in order to make possible this dream of a better life for themselves. So we all have an interest to help them stay at home and to have money and to have their field and their agriculture, and to be able to live there and let us live and continue to live us our own lives. All of us, not us only in Israel. We all want. Yeah.
John.
One of the things that, just we're finishing up at the time, one of the things that I thought maybe you had mentioned somewhere today was the fact of that amazing Israeli invention called drip irrigation. So
I mentioned it very briefly when I went.
I didn't hear that. Okay, I must have missed it. You dripped it in. Okay.
Yeah, the dripping, it's just that it's basically you have I think everybody knows it today because it's so common, but it was really a groundbreaking invention when it was made. You take a hose and you make the holes in it for dripping very, very accurately, and this way you save a lot of water and you make sure that your plants are being irrigated. And today you have Israeli people going all over Africa and helping create local agriculture across Africa with these type of solutions. We also bring a lot of solar energy solutions, which is also something that we're putting a lot of investment in, because Israel is an eternal sunshine state. So, and we're putting a lot of emphasis also in creating more solar solutions here.
All
Okay.
right.
John, okay.
Yeah, hey, Maya, great, John, thanks a lot. Super panel. A couple of last minute points here. Call of a shout out here for Blackstar Tech. You guys will get these slides. Blackstar is somebody we met about a year ago. Amazing technology that you can actually bring into multiple kinds of facilities and support critical infrastructure. They've done a great job at building this out, and I think it's one of the areas that if you look at, if you've got critical infrastructure that is power dependent, this is a place to look for to bridge that gap. And we all know that Black Sky events will require something like Blackstar Tech. You will get these slides, as I mentioned, so I'm going to bust right through these, but we appreciate them as being one of our partners, and we appreciate everybody being on the call today. Again, a multitude of different devices that they support. Lightworks is just one of those, and you've got their contact information in here. So as far as wrap-up questions, we don't have any time for that today, but what we'd like you to do is know that these sessions are going to continue. We hope you'll be part of our team going forward. Our next GRCom webinar is on emergency communications. That'll be on 21 April, same time. You will get the link, so feel free to register. That's going to be a very, very dynamic session. We've got some great new technologies, and again, it will be international in scope. And then finally, this is an ongoing effort from the EIS Council to sponsor GRCom. We've got a number of network partners that are joining us. If you'd like to join us, our new website is going to come up this weekend, and look for a way to become a member. And remember, you can follow us on LinkedIn. I want to thank John Organic and all of our panelists today for doing just a great job. I thought the forum was outstanding, and I hope you all are doing well out there. Stay safe, and we look forward to talking to you again next month. Take care.
Thank you.